Hey everyone, welcome back to Drama Queen Reviews, where we dive into the most jaw-dropping, heart-pounding stories that keep you glued to your screen today. I've got an absolute thriller for you, a Turiri pregnant wife kidnapped by Mistress, her secret diary ruined billionaire. Picture this, a 42-year-old woman, 7 months pregnant with her miracle baby after years of heartbreak, sits in her luxury SUV, staring at ultrasound pics that should bring pure joy. But through the pouring Seattle rain, she spots her billionaire husband locked in a passionate kiss with his stunning executive assistant. It's not just a betrayal. Oh no, it's way darker. Mysterious documents, a chilling overheard conversation about phase two of a sinister plan targeting her and the unborn child. Contractions kick in from the shock, but her old journalism instincts fire up. She starts a secret diary, uncovering financial fraud, a deadly pattern of destroyed families, and a web of lies that spirals into kidnapping, ransom, and even child trafficking rings. From helpless victim to fierce fighter, plot twists will leave you gasping. Who can she trust? Will she save her daughter and bring down an empire? This story of revenge, survival, and ultimate empowerment is packed with drama you won't believe. Stick around as I break it all down, chapter by chapter. You won't want to miss a single twist. If this has you hooked already, smash that like button if you're Team Sarah. Drop a comment below with your wildest prediction on the ending. Share this with your friends who live for juicy betrayals, and hit subscribe with notifications on so you never miss our next epic tale. Let's jump right in. The Seattle rain drummed against the windshield as Sarah Wellington sat in her luxury SUV, staring at the ultrasound images scattered across her lap. At 42 years old and 7 months pregnant, she should have been glowing with maternal joy. Instead, her world had just imploded in the most devastating way imaginable. Through the blur of tears and raindrops, Sarah watched her billionaire husband Marcus embrace another woman in the hospital parking garage. The woman was young, stunning, and definitely not his pregnant wife. Vanessa Cross, his executive assistant, melted into Marcus's arms with the familiarity of lovers who had been together for months. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the sonogram photos of baby Emma. This should have been the happiest day of her pregnancy. The doctor had just confirmed that their miracle baby was healthy and developing perfectly. After 3 devastating miscarriages and 15 years of marriage, this pregnancy felt like a gift from heaven. But watching Marcus kiss Vanessa with passionate intensity made Sarah's stomach turn. The husband affair with Mistress was happening right before her eyes, and the betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain she had ever experienced. The irony was crushing. Sarah had given up her promising journalism career at the Seattle Times to support Marcus's tech empire. She had been the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties, attending charity galas, and never questioning his increasingly frequent business trips or late nights at the office. Now, as the rain pelted harder against her car windows, Sarah felt like she was watching her entire life crumble through a lens of slow-motion devastation. This was her pregnant wife betrayed moment, and the emotional trauma was so intense that she could feel contractions starting in her lower abdomen. Her high-risk pregnancy meant that any emotional stress could trigger premature labor. Dr. Elizabeth Chen had been very clear about that during today's appointment. Sarah pressed her hand to her belly, silently begging Emma to stay safe despite the emotional earthquake that was destroying their family. Through her tears, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Vanessa wasn't just kissing Marcus. She was showing him official-looking documents, and his face was growing pale with each page he reviewed. Whatever those papers contained, they were making her husband visibly terrified. Sarah's journalism instincts, dormant for over a decade, suddenly roared back to life. This wasn't just a simple affair. Something much more sinister was happening, and her unborn daughter might be in danger. She quickly grabbed her phone and started taking photos through her rain-streaked windshield. The images were blurry, but they clearly showed Marcus and Vanessa in their intimate embrace. More importantly, they captured Vanessa's threatening body language as she pointed to specific sections of the documents. As Sarah watched, Marcus shook his head violently and tried to hand the papers back to Vanessa, but she refused to take them, instead placing her hands on his chest in a gesture that looked tender but felt manipulative. Whatever she was saying made Marcus's shoulders slump in defeat. Then Sarah heard something that made her heart stop. She had cracked her car window slightly to get better photos, and Vanessa's voice carried clearly across the parking garage. Once the baby is born, we can move forward with phase 2 of our plan. The pregnant wife won't know what hit her until it's too late. The casual cruelty in Vanessa's voice was chilling. She was talking about Sarah and Emma like they were obstacles to be eliminated, rather than human beings. This heartbreaking family drama was about to become something much more dangerous. Sarah's contractions intensified as panic set in. Whatever plan Vanessa was implementing, it involved her pregnancy and her unborn child. The timing wasn't coincidental. They were waiting for Emma to be born before implementing phase 2 of whatever scheme they had developed, fighting through the pain and emotional devastation. Sarah forced herself to think like the investigative reporter she used to be. She needed evidence. She needed documentation. And most importantly, she needed to protect Emma from whatever these people were planning. As she drove home through the Seattle streets, passing a billboard advertising the Good Wife Marathon on television, Sarah couldn't help but see the bitter irony. She had been playing the role of the perfect wife while her husband planned her destruction with his mistress. But Sarah Wellington wasn't going to be a victim. The midlife betrayal story that was unfolding would either destroy her family or reveal her hidden strength. She was going to find out exactly what Marcus and Vanessa were planning, and she was going to document every detail in a secret diary that would either save her life or bring down her husband's empire. By the time she pulled into the driveway of their Bellevue mansion, Sarah had made a decision that would change everything. She was going to become the detective in her own life story, and whatever secrets Marcus was hiding were about to be exposed. The rain had stopped, but the storm clouds gathering on the horizon reminded Sarah that this was just the beginning of a much larger tempest. She looked up at the glass and steel structure that had been her home for the past decade, wondering how many of her memories were built on lies. As she walked through the front door, Marcus called out from his home office with perfectly practiced concern, "Sarah, sweetheart, how did the appointment go? Is everything okay with Emma?" The casual warmth in his voice made her feel sick. This was the same man who had been kissing another woman and discussing plans that involved his pregnant wife just hours earlier. "Everything's perfect," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than her racing heart. "Emma is healthy and growing beautifully. That's wonderful news. I can't wait to see the new photos." Sarah closed her eyes and pressed her back against the front door. In a few minutes, Marcus would emerge from his office with that loving smile she had trusted completely for 15 years. He would kiss her forehead, examine the ultrasound images with fake enthusiasm, and probably suggest celebrating with dinner at their favorite restaurant. And Sarah would have to pretend that she didn't know about Vanessa's existence while her heart shattered into a million pieces. She would have to play the role of the devoted, unsuspecting wife while gathering evidence that might save her daughter's life. The first entry in her secret diary would be written tonight, hidden in Emma's nursery where Marcus would never think to look. Sarah would document every lie, every suspicious phone call, every moment when his story didn't match reality, because whatever plan Marcus and Vanessa had set in motion, Sarah was going to be ready for it. She might have been blindsided by the affair, but she wouldn't be caught unprepared for phase 2 of their scheme. The only question was whether she could gather enough evidence to protect Emma before their mysterious timeline reached its devastating conclusion. Sarah's hands shook as she opened a fresh composition notebook that night, hidden away in what would soon become Emma's nursery. The irony of documenting her marriage's destruction in the room meant to celebrate new life wasn't lost on her. Day 1, the affair confirmed, saw Marcus kissing his assistant Vanessa Cross in the hospital parking garage today. But this wasn't just an affair. She was showing him documents that terrified him. Overheard her mention phase 2 of their plan involving me and Emma. Something is very wrong here. Marcus came home with white roses and asked about Emma with such fake concern that I wanted to scream. He smells like Vanessa's expensive French perfume. How long have I been living with a stranger? The next morning brought the first of many small twists that would keep Sarah on edge for weeks. Marcus announced he was taking a week off work to focus on preparing for the baby. I want to be completely present during these final weeks of your pregnancy, he said over breakfast, his eyes never quite meeting hers. Work can wait. My family is the priority. Sarah forced a grateful smile while her mind raced. Marcus had never taken time off for anything related to their previous pregnancies, including the devastating miscarriages. Why was he suddenly so attentive? That's so thoughtful, she managed. But don't you have that big investor meeting this week? A flicker of something crossed Marcus's face. Postponed. Nothing is more important than you and Emma right now. Sarah excused herself to use the bathroom and immediately called Marcus's office from her cell phone. Wellington Technologies, Vanessa speaking, came the sultry voice that now haunted Sarah's nightmares. Is Mr. Wellington available? This is his wife. The pause lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Oh, Mrs. Wellington. Actually, Mr. Wellington is in back-to-back meetings with investors all week. He specifically asked not to be disturbed. Can I take a message? Sarah's blood ran cold. Marcus had just lied to her face about his schedule, and Vanessa was covering for him. No message. I'll catch him at home. As Sarah hung up, she realized that every day would now be filled with these small tests, these tiny investigations to determine what was real and what was performance in her marriage. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah developed a sophisticated system for tracking Marcus's deceptions. She created fake errands that would take her past his office building, documenting when his car was actually there versus when he claimed to be working. She monitored their credit card statements with forensic precision, noting every charge that didn't match his stated activities. Day 8, financial irregularities discovered. Found evidence that Marcus has been lying about almost everything. Credit card shows lunch at expensive restaurants during times when he claimed to be in board meetings. Cash withdrawals of $5,000 every week for 3 months. When questioned, he said it was for baby expenses. $60,000 seems excessive for a nursery. The most chilling discovery came when Sarah found a hidden folder on Marcus's laptop while he was in the shower. Using skills she'd learned during her journalism career, she managed to access files that revealed the true scope of whatever plan was unfolding. Marcus had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Emma. The paperwork was dated just 6 weeks after Sarah had announced her pregnancy. Who insures an unborn child unless they're planning something terrible? But the financial documents revealed something even more disturbing. Marcus's tech company was hemorrhaging money. The brilliant billionaire husband scandal that everyone admired was built on fraudulent investment reports and embezzled client funds. Wellington Technologies was essentially a shell company covering up massive financial crimes. Day 15, insurance discovery. Marcus took out life insurance on Emma 6 weeks after I announced my pregnancy. $2 million payable to him if anything happens to our daughter. Combined with the financial fraud I've uncovered, I think Vanessa isn't just his mistress. She's helping him orchestrate some kind of elaborate scheme that involves Emma's death. Sarah's investigation took a dangerous turn when she decided to research Vanessa Cross's background, using the Seattle Public Library's computers to avoid leaving digital traces. Sarah discovered that Vanessa Cross had worked for 3 different wealthy executives in the past 5 years. All 3 men had suffered catastrophic business failures within 18 months of hiring her. One had been charged with embezzlement before dying in a suspicious car accident. Another had fled the country to avoid fraud charges, leaving behind a bankrupt company and investors who had lost everything. The third had committed suicide just days before federal agents raided his offices. Even more disturbing was the pattern involving their families. Each executive had been married with children. Each wife had died under suspicious circumstances before her husband's business empire collapsed. Car accidents, home invasions, mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't explain. Vanessa Cross wasn't just a mistress or even a con artist. She was a professional destroyer of families, and she specialized in eliminating witnesses who might expose her crimes. Day 18, Vanessa's pattern revealed. Vanessa has done this before, multiple times. She targets wealthy men, destroys their businesses, and eliminates their families. The wives always die first, usually in ways that look like accidents. Then the husbands either die or disappear, leaving no one who can testify about what really happened. I think Marcus got involved with her willingly, but now he's trapped. Either way, Emma and I are marked for elimination. That weekend, Marcus surprised Sarah with a romantic baby moon to Napa Valley. At 31 weeks pregnant, Sarah wasn't enthusiastic about traveling, but Marcus insisted they needed time to reconnect before Emma's arrival. "I know I've been distracted lately," he said during dinner at an upscale resort. "The pressure of becoming a father again at my age, combined with work stress, has made me less present than I should be. But I want you to know that you and Emma are everything to me." His performance was so convincing that Sarah almost believed him. Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he reached across the table to take her hand. For a moment, she wondered if she'd been wrong about everything. Maybe the affair was just a midlife crisis that had already ended. Maybe the financial irregularities had innocent explanations. "I love you, Marcus," she said carefully, watching his face for any sign of deception. "But I need to know that we're solid, that you're completely committed to our family. Sarah, I swear to you on Emma's life that nothing matters more to me than protecting you both. I would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep you safe." The oath should have been reassuring, but something in Marcus's tone made Sarah's skin crawl. He wasn't promising to love them. He was promising to protect them. And from what she'd learned about Vanessa's pattern, protection might involve eliminating threats to their safety, including threats that came from Sarah's own curiosity about her husband's activities. That night, while Marcus slept deeply beside her, Sarah slipped into the hotel bathroom and found conclusive proof that her worst fears were justified. Vanessa's diamond earring lay on the marble counter, the same distinctive piece Sarah had seen her wearing at the office just days earlier. Marcus hadn't brought Sarah to Napa to reconnect with his wife. He'd brought her to the same suite where he'd been conducting his affair, probably just hours before Sarah's arrival. The cruelty was breathtaking, but it also revealed something crucial about Marcus's psychological state. He was either completely under Vanessa's control, or he was actively participating in a plan designed to torment Sarah before eliminating her. Day 22, Napa Valley Discovery. Found Vanessa's earring in our hotel bathroom. Marcus brought me to their love nest and made me sit in the same chair where she probably sat just hours earlier. The psychological torture is deliberate and sophisticated. Either he's become a monster, or he's so terrified of Vanessa that he'll do anything she demands. Either way, I can't trust him to protect Emma. I'm completely alone in this. Sarah returned to bed and lay awake for hours, one hand on her belly, feeling Emma's movements and wondering if her daughter would survive long enough to be born. The contractions she'd been experiencing were getting stronger and more frequent. The stress was affecting her pregnancy in ways that could prove catastrophic. But Sarah also realized something that gave her a small measure of hope. She wasn't the same woman who had discovered the affair 3 weeks ago. That woman had been naive, trusting, and completely unprepared for the level of deception she was facing. This woman was becoming something different, something harder and more dangerous. The investigative reporter, who had been buried under years of corporate wife expectations, was clawing her way back to the surface. Marcus and Vanessa thought they were hunting a helpless pregnant woman. They had no idea they were actually stalking someone who was learning to hunt them back. The game was about to become much more interesting. Sarah's contractions started in earnest during their drive back from Napa Valley, sharp pains that doubled her over in the passenger seat of Marcus's Tesla. Each spasm felt like her body was rebelling against the emotional trauma that had been building for weeks. "We need to get to the hospital," Marcus said, his voice tight with what seemed like genuine concern. "This is too early. Emma isn't ready yet." But as they rushed toward Swedish Medical Center, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Marcus kept checking his phone at red lights, and she caught a glimpse of multiple text messages from Vanessa. The timestamp showed they had been sent throughout their supposedly romantic dinner the night before. The emergency room was a blur of monitors, needles, and concerned medical professionals. Dr. Elizabeth Chen arrived within 30 minutes, her face grave as she reviewed Sarah's test results. "Sarah, your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and we're seeing signs of severe preeclampsia," Dr. Chen explained. "I'm putting you on complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. Any additional stress could trigger premature labor or worse." "What does that mean for Emma?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "It means we're walking a tightrope. Your body is rejecting the pregnancy due to extreme emotional trauma. If we can't get your stress levels under control, we could lose both of you." Marcus gripped Sarah's hand with what appeared to be desperate love. "Whatever it takes, Doctor. Sarah's health is the only thing that matters." But Sarah noticed that Marcus seemed almost relieved by the diagnosis. Bed rest meant she would be confined to their house, unable to continue her investigation, completely dependent on him for information about the outside world. As they settled Sarah into a private room for 48 hours of observation, Marcus's phone rang. He stepped into the hallway to take the call, and Sarah strained to hear fragments of his conversation. "I understand the timeline is tight, but she's in the hospital. No, we can't accelerate anything while there are medical professionals monitoring her. I don't care what your people want. If anything happens to Sarah or the baby right now, there will be investigations." Sarah's heart rate spiked so dramatically that the monitors started beeping. A nurse rushed in to check her vitals, and by the time Marcus returned, Sarah was hooked up to additional equipment designed to prevent premature labor. "Sorry about that," Marcus said, his practiced, concerned husband expression firmly in place. "Crisis at work? Nothing that can't wait." Over the next 2 days, Sarah had visitors who would become crucial to her survival. Her best friend Janet arrived first, bringing comfort items and her trained therapist's eye for detecting emotional abuse. "You look terrified," Janet said bluntly after Marcus left to get coffee. "This isn't just pregnancy complications. What's really happening?" Sarah glanced toward the door, then made a crucial decision. "Janet, I think Marcus is planning to kill me and Emma." Janet's expression didn't change, which told Sarah that her friend's professional instincts had already detected signs of serious danger. "How long have you suspected this?" "3 weeks, since I caught him with his mistress. But it's not just an affair. I've been investigating, and there are financial crimes, insurance policies on Emma, and his mistress has a history of targeting wealthy families who end up destroyed or dead." "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. If what you're saying is true, you need to start thinking about this like a domestic violence situation. Document everything, but be careful about who you trust." Janet's validation was like oxygen to Sarah's lungs. For weeks, she'd been questioning her own sanity, wondering if pregnancy hormones were making her paranoid. Having a trained professional confirm that her fears were justified gave her the strength to continue fighting. Elena Rodriguez, the hospital's social worker, became Sarah's second crucial ally. During a routine check-in, Elena's trained eye picked up on dynamics that concerned her. "Mrs. Wellington, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've noticed your husband seems very controlling about your visitors and conversations. Is everything okay at home?" Sarah studied Elena's kind face, noting the direct eye contact and open body language that suggested genuine concern rather than professional obligation. "I think my marriage isn't what I believed it was," Sarah admitted carefully. Elena nodded. "I want you to know that this hospital has resources for women in dangerous situations. If you ever need help, for any reason, here's my direct number." She handed Sarah a card with her personal cell phone number written on the back. The biggest surprise came when Sarah's estranged sister, Monica, arrived from Portland without warning. They hadn't spoken in over a year after a bitter argument about Sarah's decision to sacrifice her career for Marcus's ambitions. "Janet called me," Monica explained, settling into the visitor's chair with her characteristic no-nonsense attitude. "She said you needed family support, and despite our differences, you're still my sister." Monica was everything Sarah wasn't: At 39, she was a successful architect who had built her own firm, traveled internationally, and made decisions based on logic rather than emotion. She'd always thought Marcus was too controlling and had never hesitated to voice that opinion. "You look like hell," Monica said with typical bluntness. "And scared." Janet mentioned marriage problems. "But this looks more serious than infidelity." Sarah found herself confessing everything to her sister. Monica listened without judgment, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed her analytical mind. "Let me understand this correctly," Monica summarized. "Your husband is having an affair with a woman who might be a professional criminal. He's been moving money around secretly and took out life insurance on your unborn child. His company is apparently built on financial fraud, and now you're on bed rest at exactly the time when you should be gathering evidence and protecting yourself legally." "That's the situation." Monica was quiet for a long moment, staring out the hospital window at the Seattle skyline. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about adultery anymore. If this woman has the pattern you described, and if Marcus is either her partner or her victim, you could be looking at kidnapping, financial fraud, or murder." "What do you mean?" "I mean you might not survive this pregnancy, and even if you do, Emma might not make it to her first birthday." The blunt assessment hit Sarah like a physical blow, but it also clarified her thinking in a way that weeks of emotional turmoil hadn't managed to accomplish. "What should I do?" "First, you need to accept that the Marcus you married might not exist anymore. Either he's become someone else, or he was never who you thought he was. Second, you need to start planning for scenarios where you're completely on your own with a newborn. How money, documentation, and allies. If you're right about the life insurance policy, Marcus has a financial incentive for both you and Emma to die. If you're wrong, you've lost nothing by being prepared." That evening, alone in her hospital room while Marcus attended another supposed business emergency, Sarah used her phone to research something she'd been avoiding. What had happened to the other wives in Vanessa's pattern? The first wife, Margaret Chen, had died in a single-car accident 3 months after her husband's embezzlement charges were filed. She'd been driving home from her lawyer's office where she'd just signed divorce papers that would have given her half of her husband's assets. The second wife, Lisa Park, had suffered a fatal fall down the stairs of her home while her husband was supposedly out of the country. The coroner had ruled it accidental, but neighbors reported hearing arguing voices just minutes before she was found. The third wife, Jennifer Morrison, was officially listed as missing. She'd been last seen leaving a coffee shop near her home, carrying documents that her sister later described as evidence of her husband's financial crimes. Day 28, the other wives. They're all dead or missing. Every wife of Vanessa's previous targets. Accidents, falls, disappearances. This isn't just about money or affairs. Vanessa eliminates witnesses. She eliminates wives who know too much. "I'm not just fighting for my marriage anymore. I'm fighting for my life and Emma's life, and I think I'm running out of time." Sarah's hands shook as she wrote in her diary. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying, but she also realized something else that gave her a small measure of hope. Those other wives had been fighting alone. They'd had no warning about Vanessa's true nature, no time to prepare, no support system to help them survive. Sarah had all of those things. She had Janet's psychological expertise, Elena's institutional support, and Monica's ruthless pragmatism. She had documented evidence of the financial crimes and insurance fraud. Most importantly, she had advance warning about what was coming. The question was whether that would be enough to break Vanessa's pattern of perfect murders. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to wait for Vanessa to make her move. She was going to force the confrontation on her own terms, when she was ready for it. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Sarah was discharged from the hospital 3 days later, with strict instructions for complete bed rest and weekly monitoring. Marcus played the attentive husband perfectly, converting their master bedroom into a recovery suite with everything she might need within arm's reach. "I've cleared my schedule for the next month," he announced, arranging pillows behind her back with practiced care. My only priority is taking care of you and Emma. Sarah smiled gratefully while internally screaming. The last thing she needed was Marcus monitoring her every movement and conversation 24 hours a day. But fate intervened in the form of what appeared to be a genuine crisis at Wellington Technologies. Marcus's phone had been ringing constantly since they'd returned home, and his stress levels seemed authentically elevated. During one particularly heated conversation, Sarah caught fragments that suggested major problems with their primary investors. I understand the timeline, but I can't leave my wife right now, Marcus said urgently into his phone. She's on bed rest with a high-risk pregnancy. No, I can't send someone else. They specifically requested that I handle this personally. After hanging up, Marcus looked genuinely torn. Sarah, I hate to even ask this, but there's a situation in San Francisco that requires my immediate attention. Our biggest investor is threatening to pull out unless I can meet with them face-to-face tomorrow. Sarah forced herself to look disappointed rather than relieved. How long would you be gone? Just overnight. I'd fly down tomorrow morning and be back by evening. But if you're not comfortable being alone, I'll be fine, Sarah assured him. Janet said she could check on me, and it's not like I'm going anywhere. Marcus's relief was visible, though Sarah couldn't tell if it was because he could handle his business crisis or because he had other plans for his overnight trip. Either way, his absence would give her the opportunity she desperately needed. The moment Marcus's car disappeared down their driveway the next morning, Sarah was out of bed and moving as quickly as her pregnant body allowed. She had maybe 8 hours before his return, and she intended to use every minute. Her first stop was Marcus's home office, where she photographed every document she could find: financial records, email printouts, business contracts, and most importantly, a folder labeled insurance documentation that contained detailed plans of their house, security system specifications, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of Sarah's daily routines. The photos were the most chilling discovery. Someone had been watching her for months, documenting her morning walks, her coffee shop visits, her doctor's appointments. Every aspect of her life had been studied and recorded with the precision of a military operation. But the most terrifying find was a handwritten note in Vanessa's distinctive script. Target confirmed isolated. Medical complications provide perfect cover. Execute extraction within 72 hours of discharge. Extraction. They weren't just planning to eliminate Sarah. They were planning to take her somewhere else first. Probably to extract information about what she knew, or to stage her death in a way that would look accidental. Sarah photographed everything with trembling hands, uploading the images to a cloud storage account that Marcus couldn't access. Then she made copies of the most crucial documents, hiding them in various locations throughout the house. Her investigation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Marcus wasn't supposed to be back for hours, but Sarah could hear footsteps in the downstairs hallway. Moving as quietly as possible, Sarah crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. It wasn't Marcus. It was Vanessa, moving through their house with the confidence of someone who had been there many times before. Vanessa was carrying what appeared to be surveillance equipment, small devices that she was placing in strategic locations throughout the first floor. She was bugging their house, probably preparing for the extraction that her note had mentioned. Sarah held her breath as Vanessa moved through the living room, kitchen, and Marcus's office, installing listening devices with professional efficiency. When Vanessa headed toward the stairs, Sarah barely managed to get back to the bedroom before being discovered. For the next 2 hours, Sarah lay in bed pretending to nap while Vanessa moved through their house like she owned it. The violation was almost as traumatic as the threat itself. This woman had been in their home repeatedly, studying their lives, preparing for their destruction. When Vanessa finally left, Sarah immediately called Elena Rodriguez. Elena, I can't explain everything over the phone, but I'm in immediate danger. If something happens to me in the next few days, there's a diary hidden in my daughter's nursery behind the baby books on the middle shelf. It contains evidence of financial crimes and murder plots. Sarah, what kind of danger should I call the police? I don't have enough proof yet that they would believe, but if I disappear, or if something happens to me or the baby, Promise me you'll get that diary to the authorities. I'm coming over right now. No, if they're watching, it could put you in danger too. Just promise me about the diary. After hanging up with Elena, Sarah called Janet with a similar message. Then Monica. She was creating a network of people who would ask questions if she vanished, people who knew where to find the evidence she'd been gathering. But Sarah also realized that she needed to do more than just document the crimes. She needed to force Vanessa into making a mistake that would expose the entire operation. That evening, when Marcus returned from his supposed business trip, Sarah was ready for him. "How did the meeting go?" she asked, noting that he seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. "Better than expected. Crisis averted. Investors satisfied. Sorry I was gone so long." Sarah nodded sympathetically while studying his face for signs of deception. "I'm just glad you're home. I missed you." "I missed you too. How are you feeling? Any contractions or complications while I was gone?" The question seemed loaded with significance that Sarah couldn't quite interpret. Was he hoping for medical complications that would require another hospital stay? Or was he checking to make sure she was still healthy enough for whatever Vanessa had planned? "Everything's fine. Emma's been kicking up a storm, but no problems." That night, Sarah lay awake listening to Marcus sleep beside her, knowing that their time was running out. The 72-hour timeline from Vanessa's note meant that whatever they were planning would happen within the next 2 days. She was 8 months pregnant, confined to bed rest, and completely isolated in a house that had been turned into a surveillance center by her husband's mistress. On paper, she was the perfect victim for whatever scheme they had developed. But Sarah had spent the past month transforming herself from a naive victim into something much more dangerous. She had documented evidence of their crimes, created a support network of allies, and most importantly, she had figured out how to turn their own plan against them. Tomorrow, she would find out if she was smart enough to outmaneuver professional killers, or if she would become just another mysterious accident in Vanessa's pattern of perfect murders. The 72-hour countdown had begun, and Sarah intended to be ready for whatever came next. The next evening brought everything Sarah had been dreading. Marcus received a phone call that changed his entire demeanor, his voice becoming tense and urgent as he spoke in hushed tones from his office. "I understand, but the timeline is too rushed," she heard him saying. "Yes, I know what's at stake, but if we move too quickly..." "Fine. Tonight it is." Sarah's contractions started immediately, her body responding to stress with the precision of a finely tuned alarm system. She pressed her hand to her belly, silently begging Emma to stay safe just a little longer. Whatever was about to happen, her daughter needed to survive it. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. Sarah heard Marcus answer it, followed by the sound of multiple voices and heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat as she grabbed her phone and quickly sent a pre-written text to Janet. "They're here. Get the diary. Save Emma." Marcus appeared in the bedroom doorway with Vanessa and 2 large men Sarah didn't recognize. The men positioned themselves strategically, one by the window and one near the door, blocking all escape routes with military precision. "Sarah, these are business associates of mine," Marcus said, his voice strangely formal and detached. "They need to discuss some urgent financial matters with us." Vanessa stepped forward with a smile that was pure predator. "Hello, Sarah. We've heard so much about you." "I'm Vanessa Cross, Marcus's assistant." The casual introduction was almost more chilling than an outright threat. Vanessa was so confident in her control of the situation that she didn't even bother to hide her identity. "Marcus," Sarah said carefully, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "What's going on?" But Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. He stood slightly behind Vanessa, his face pale and defeated, like a man who had already accepted his fate. Vanessa pulled out a gun, her movements casual and practiced. "Sarah, you've been asking a lot of questions about things that don't concern you. That's going to stop tonight." "Please," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her terror. "I'm 8 months pregnant. Whatever this is about, my baby hasn't done anything wrong. Oh, but the baby is exactly what this is about, Vanessa said with a smile that made Sarah's skin crawl. You see, Marcus owes my organization a considerable amount of money. Money he borrowed to keep his little tech empire from collapsing. And pregnant women make very cooperative hostages when it comes to debt collection. Sarah looked at Marcus, searching for any sign that he was going to protect her, but his expression remained blank and hopeless, as if he was watching something inevitable unfold. The life insurance money will help offset Marcus's debt, Vanessa continued conversationally, and you're going to help us collect it by participating in a little performance. One of the men moved towards Sarah with zip ties, but she held up her hand to stop him. Wait, she said, her voice gaining strength. Before you do whatever you're planning, I need you to know something. I've been investigating this operation for weeks. I know about the other wives, the other families you've destroyed, and I've documented everything. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? I mean, I know about Margaret Chen, Lisa Park, and Jennifer Morrison. I know about the car accidents, the falls, the disappearances. And I know that you're not just stealing money, you're running a murder-for-hire operation that specializes in eliminating wealthy families. The room went completely silent. Marcus was staring at Sarah with a mixture of terror and admiration, as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. You've been busy, Vanessa said slowly, but it doesn't matter what you think you know. Dead women don't testify in court. No, Sarah agreed, but their evidence does. I've been keeping a detailed diary of everything I've discovered. Financial records, insurance documents, surveillance photos. It's all documented and stored in multiple locations where your people will never find it. You're bluffing. Sarah smiled with more confidence than she felt. Am I? How do you think I knew to expect you tonight? I've been 3 steps ahead of your operation for weeks. It was a complete lie, but it was delivered with enough conviction to make Vanessa hesitate. Sarah could see doubt creeping into the other woman's eyes, uncertainty about how much Sarah actually knew. Even if that's true, Vanessa said finally, your evidence won't matter if you're not alive to present it. Actually, it will matter more, because I've arranged for everything to be released automatically if something happens to me. My death will trigger a media blitz that will expose your entire organization. Another lie, but Vanessa was clearly starting to worry about variables she hadn't accounted for in her perfect plan. Sarah's contractions were getting stronger and more frequent now, but she forced herself to ignore the pain. Emma was coming whether the situation was safe or not, and Sarah needed to buy them both time. I need a hospital, Sarah said, her voice becoming strained. The baby's coming now, and if something goes wrong, your whole plan falls apart. Vanessa looked genuinely panicked for the first time. A dead pregnant woman was one thing, but a botched childbirth in a kidnapping scenario would leave too much evidence. Too many questions. Call Marcus, she snapped to one of her associates. Tell him to bring the money and get here immediately. We're moving to phase 3 ahead of schedule. What money? Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The ransom money, Vanessa explained with returning confidence. Marcus is going to pay us $2 million for your safe return. Of course, accidents happen during kidnappings. Sometimes the victim doesn't survive, despite everyone's best efforts. Sarah realized with crystal clarity that Vanessa's plan was elegant and virtually foolproof. Marcus would appear to be the desperate husband paying ransom for his wife's release. When Sarah died anyway, he would be the grieving widower collecting insurance money to recover his financial losses. The perfect crime with the perfect cover story, except for one thing that Vanessa hadn't anticipated. Sarah's contractions were now coming every few minutes, and Emma was definitely going to be born tonight, whether anyone was ready or not. The baby's coming now, Sarah gasped as another contraction hit with overwhelming intensity. I can feel the head crowning. She can't give birth here, one of the men said urgently. If something goes wrong, there'll be investigations. Forensics. Too much risk. Vanessa was clearly losing control of her carefully planned operation. A kidnapping was one thing, but delivering a baby in a warehouse while committing multiple felonies was far beyond her comfort zone. Fine, she snapped. We're taking her to the hospital, But if she says one word to anyone about what's really happening, both she and the baby die immediately. As they prepared to move Sarah, she realized that this might be her only chance to escape. Once they got her to a second location, her odds of survival would drop to zero. But as another contraction hit with devastating force, Sarah also realized that Emma wasn't going to wait for a convenient rescue. Her daughter was coming into the world tonight, in the middle of a kidnapping, surrounded by people who wanted them both dead. The only question was whether Sarah could find a way to save them both before it was too late. The ambulance ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Sarah's life. Vanessa sat beside her in the back, a gun concealed under a jacket, while one of her associates rode up front with the paramedic. To any observer, they looked like concerned family members supporting a woman in premature labor. "Remember," Vanessa whispered as Sarah's contractions intensified, "one wrong word and your baby dies before taking her first breath." Sarah nodded, conserving her energy for what she knew would be the fight of her life. Emma was coming fast now, and Sarah could feel her daughter's urgent need to be born overwhelming every other consideration. At Swedish Medical Center, Dr. Chen was waiting with a full delivery team. Sarah's regular obstetrician took one look at her condition and immediately began preparing for an emergency delivery. "Sarah, you're at 9 centimeters, Dr. Chen announced after a quick examination. "This baby is coming whether we're ready or not. I need you to focus on breathing and let us handle everything else." Through the haze of labor pain, Sarah managed to catch Dr. Chen's eye and mouth the word, "help." It was a tiny gesture, but Dr. Chen was experienced enough to recognize genuine distress when she saw it. "I need everyone except medical personnel to wait in the family room," Dr. Chen announced firmly. "This is a high-risk delivery, and I can't have any distractions." Vanessa started to protest, but a nurse firmly guided her toward the door. "Hospital policy," the nurse explained. "No exceptions during emergency deliveries." For the next 2 hours, Sarah was surrounded by medical professionals who had no idea they were protecting her from kidnappers. Dr. Chen delivered Emma with expert care, and Sarah's daughter entered the world healthy and screaming, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her birth. "She's perfect," Dr. Chen said, placing Emma on Sarah's chest. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Sarah looked down at her daughter's tiny face and felt a surge of protective love so powerful it literally took her breath away. Whatever happened next, Emma was real and alive and beautiful. No one was going to hurt her if Sarah had anything to say about it. But even as Sarah bonded with her newborn daughter, she could see Vanessa through the delivery room window, pacing like a caged predator. The reprieve was temporary at best. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said quietly while the nurses cleaned Emma, "I need you to listen very carefully. The people in the waiting room aren't my family. I'm being held against my will, and both my daughter and I are in immediate danger." Dr. Chen's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Are you sure your husband seemed very concerned about you?" "That's not my husband. My real husband is being forced to pay ransom money for our release. If you don't help us, they're going to kill us both." "What do you need me to do?" Sarah thought quickly, weighing their limited options. "Call security. Tell them there are armed individuals in the hospital who are planning to kidnap a patient. But be careful. These people have killed before, and they won't hesitate to hurt innocent bystanders." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "I'll handle it discreetly. You just focus on recovering from delivery." But as Dr. Chen moved toward the phone, Vanessa burst through the delivery room doors with her associates, their facades of concerned family members completely abandoned. "Time to go," Vanessa announced, pointing her gun directly at Emma. "We've got a schedule to keep. You can't move a woman who just gave birth," Dr. Chen protested. "She needs at least 24 hours of medical observation." "She'll get all the medical attention she needs at our facility," Vanessa said coldly. "Now step away from the patient." But as Vanessa moved toward Sarah's bed, alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. Emergency lights flashed in the hallways, and the sound of running footsteps echoed from multiple directions. What did you do? Vanessa demanded, whirling on Dr. Chen. Standard protocol for a high-risk delivery. Doctor, Chen lied smoothly. Neonatal intensive care team is responding to ensure the baby's safety. Vanessa clearly didn't believe her. But before she could respond, the delivery room doors burst open and hospital security officers flooded in, followed by Seattle police officers with weapons drawn. Drop your weapons and step away from the patients, the lead officer commanded. Vanessa's face contorted with rage as she realized her perfect plan was collapsing around her. But instead of surrendering, she pointed her gun directly at Emma's tiny chest. "Everyone back off, or the baby dies," she screamed. "I'll kill her right now." The standoff lasted exactly 37 seconds, according to the hospital security footage that would later be reviewed in court. Vanessa holding a gun on a newborn baby, police officers with weapons trained on her, medical staff frozen in horror at the thought of violence in their delivery room. Then Marcus Wellington burst through the doors, carrying a suitcase that presumably contained ransom money, and everything changed again. "Vanessa, stop," Marcus said, his voice breaking with exhaustion and desperation. "I have your money, $2 million in cash, just like you demanded. Let them go." "It's too late for that," Vanessa snarled. "Your wife knows too much, and she's been gathering evidence. The only way to clean this up is to eliminate all the witnesses." "Please," Marcus begged, and Sarah realized with shock that his anguish was completely genuine. "You said if I cooperated, if I paid the money, you'd let them live. That was our deal." "Deals change," Vanessa said with a shrug. "Your wife turned out to be smarter than we expected. Now she has to die, along with anyone who might have helped her." That's when Sarah understood the full scope of Vanessa's plan. It wasn't just about money or insurance fraud. Vanessa intended to eliminate everyone who could testify about her operation. Sarah, Emma, Marcus, probably Dr. Chen and any hospital staff who had witnessed the kidnapping. But Vanessa had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how many people Sarah had told about her investigation. As if summoned by Sarah's thoughts, Elena Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, followed by Janet and Monica. They'd received Sarah's emergency messages and had come to the hospital looking for her. "Oh, good," Vanessa said with dark satisfaction. "All the witnesses in one convenient location." She was raising her gun to fire when Marcus made a decision that redeemed 15 years of marriage in a single moment. He threw himself between Vanessa and Sarah's bed, taking the bullet that had been intended for his wife. The delivery room erupted in chaos. Police officers tackled Vanessa and her associates. Medical staff rushed to treat Marcus's gunshot wound. And through it all, Sarah held Emma protectively against her chest, shielding her daughter from the violence that was finally ending their nightmare. "It's over," Dr. Chen said, checking Sarah's vital signs as paramedics worked on Marcus. "You're safe now, both of you." But even as Sarah felt relief flooding through her exhausted body, she knew that the hardest part was just beginning. Vanessa's operation had been exposed, but there would be investigations, trials, and media coverage that would turn their private trauma into public entertainment. The pregnant wife betrayed by her husband's mistress would become a story that millions of people would follow obsessively. The heartbreaking family drama would be dissected on television talk shows and social media platforms. Sarah looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had surrounded her birth, and made a promise that would guide every decision for the rest of their lives. No one would ever hurt her daughter again, and whatever it took to ensure Emma's safety and happiness, Sarah was prepared to do it. The war for their survival was over. But the battle for their future was just beginning. 3 months after Emma's dramatic birth, Sarah sat in the law offices of Patricia Morrison, Seattle's most respected attorney specializing in cases involving wealthy men and their crimes against women. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Elliott Bay sparkled in the autumn sunshine, but Sarah's focus was entirely on the documents spread across the conference table. "The criminal charges against Vanessa and her associates are moving forward smoothly," Patricia explained, reviewing the latest court filings. "The FBI has connected their operation to at least 12 other cases involving missing families and suspicious deaths." Sarah shifted Emma to her other arm, marveling at how normal this felt now. 3 months ago, she'd been a terrified pregnant woman fighting for her life. Today, she was a single mother rebuilding her world from the ground up. Marcus had survived the shooting, but his recovery was complicated by federal charges related to the money laundering operation that had made him vulnerable to Vanessa's blackmail in the first place. He was cooperating fully with investigators, providing evidence that would help convict other members of the criminal network. "What about the divorce proceedings?" Sarah asked. "Marcus isn't contesting anything," Patricia replied. "He's agreed to full custody for you, generous child support, and a settlement that will give you financial independence for life. Frankly, I've never seen a more cooperative defendant." Sarah wasn't surprised. Marcus's guilt over what had happened to her and Emma was so profound that he would have agreed to almost anything she demanded. But Sarah didn't want revenge. She wanted justice and the freedom to build a new life for herself and her daughter. "The more interesting development," Patricia continued, "is the book deal and media opportunities you've been offered. Several publishers are interested in your story, and there's been interest from production companies about adapting it for television." Sarah had been expecting this. The story of the pregnant wife kidnapped by her husband's mistress had captured national attention, particularly after details emerged about Vanessa's pattern of targeting and eliminating wealthy families. "I'm not interested in exploiting our trauma for entertainment," Sarah said firmly. "I understand that impulse," Patricia replied, "but consider this. Your story could help other women recognize the warning signs of financial abuse and domestic manipulation. You could potentially save lives by sharing what you learned." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely unaware that she was at the center of a media sensation. The idea of turning their nightmare into educational content appealed to Sarah's dormant journalism instincts. "What kind of control would I have over the narrative?" "Complete control. We would structure any deal to ensure that you maintain ownership of your story and approval over how it's presented." Over the next several weeks, Sarah found herself considering opportunities she'd never imagined. Oprah's production company wanted to develop a documentary series about women who had survived systematic gaslighting. Several universities had invited her to speak about recognizing and documenting financial crimes. A major publisher was offering an advance that would allow her to write her story on her own terms. But the most unexpected opportunity came from Agent Lisa Chen of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, who had been investigating Vanessa's organization for 3 years. "Mrs. Wellington," Agent Chen said during a meeting at the federal building, "your documentation of Vanessa's operation was some of the most thorough evidence we've ever seen from a civilian. Have you ever considered a career in law enforcement?" Sarah almost laughed. "3 months ago, I was a housewife who hadn't worked in over a decade. I don't think I'm qualified for federal employment." "You'd be surprised. Your investigative instincts are excellent, and you have a unique understanding of how these criminal organizations operate. We could use someone with your skills on our task force." The offer was tempting, but Sarah had other plans. She was going to write her book, not just as a memoir, but as a practical guide for women facing similar situations. She wanted to create resources that would help other wives recognize financial abuse, document evidence safely, and protect themselves and their children. "I'm flattered," Sarah told Agent Chen, "but I think I can be more helpful working outside the system. Sometimes victims trust civilians more than they trust law enforcement." 6 months after Emma's birth, Sarah's life looked completely different from the existence she'd lived as Marcus's wife. She'd moved into a modest but comfortable house in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, close enough to Marcus's minimum security federal prison for Emma to visit her father regularly, but far enough away to feel like a fresh start. Sarah's days were filled with writing, speaking engagements, and the ordinary demands of single motherhood. She'd discovered that she was remarkably good at managing her own finances, something she'd never been allowed to do during her marriage. But the most profound change was internal. Sarah had learned that she was capable of surviving things she'd never imagined facing. The woman who had been completely dependent on her husband's approval and protection was gone. replaced by someone who trusted her own instincts and made her own decisions. "You look different," Janet observed during one of their weekly coffee dates. "Not just physically, though you do look healthier. You carry yourself differently." "How so?" "Like someone who knows her own power. It's actually a little intimidating." Sarah laughed, bouncing Emma on her lap. "Good. I never want to be vulnerable like that again." "Are you dating anyone?" The question made Sarah pause. Several men had expressed interest, including David Chen, Agent Chen's brother and a trauma counselor who specialized in helping families recover from financial crimes. David was kind, intelligent, and genuinely interested in both Sarah and Emma. "I'm not ready yet," Sarah admitted. "Maybe someday. But right now I'm focused on figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by someone else's expectations." "That's probably healthy. You're basically learning to be an adult for the first time in 15 years. It was a harsh assessment, but not inaccurate. Sarah had gotten married so young and had been so focused on supporting Marcus's career that she'd never really developed her own identity. Now, at 43, she was finally discovering what she wanted out of life. She wanted to help other women avoid the traps she'd fallen into. She wanted to be a role model for Emma, showing her daughter that women could be strong and independent and successful on their own terms. Most importantly, she wanted to transform her trauma into purpose. The worst thing that had ever happened to her was becoming the foundation for the most meaningful work she'd ever done. Sarah's book was published 8 months after Emma's birth, titled The Diary of a Survivor: How I Outsmarted a Criminal Network and Saved My Family. It immediately hit the bestseller lists and sparked conversations about financial abuse, gaslighting, and the warning signs of domestic manipulation. The success of the book led to speaking engagements across the country. Sarah found herself addressing audiences of women who had experienced similar betrayals, sharing strategies for recognizing and documenting financial crimes. "The most important thing I learned," Sarah would tell these audiences, "is that your story belongs to you. No matter how many people try to rewrite it, no matter how convincing their version seems, you are the only person who gets to decide what your truth looks like." After each speaking engagement, women would approach Sarah with their own stories of betrayal and survival. Many had discovered affairs or financial crimes that destroyed their marriages. Others had faced gaslighting campaigns designed to make them question their own sanity. All of them found hope in Sarah's journey from victim to survivor to advocate. "You saved my life," one woman told Sarah after a conference in Denver. "I was starting to believe that I was crazy, that the financial irregularities I discovered were just coincidences. Your book taught me to trust my instincts and document everything." These conversations reminded Sarah why she'd chosen to share her story publicly. Every woman who recognized the warning signs, every family that avoided destruction, every criminal who was exposed and prosecuted justified the invasion of privacy that came with being a public figure. But Sarah also realized that her story was far from over. Vanessa's trial was scheduled to begin in 6 months, and Sarah would be the key witness for the prosecution. The media attention would intensify, and Emma would be old enough to be affected by the coverage. Sarah looked at her daughter, now walking and beginning to say her first words, and wondered how to explain someday that mommy was famous because daddy's girlfriend had tried to kill them both. It was a conversation for another day, another year. For now, Sarah was focused on building a life that was authentic, purposeful, and completely under her own control. The woman who had once defined herself entirely through her marriage was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to people who preyed on innocent families. Sarah Wellington had learned to fight back, and she was just getting started. 2 years after Emma's birth, Sarah Wellington stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Washington, delivering the keynote address for their annual Women's Leadership Conference. The audience of 500 included students, professionals, and survivors of various forms of domestic abuse, all hanging on her every word. 3 years ago, I was a woman who had lost everything I thought defined me, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My marriage was built on lies. My financial security was an illusion, and my sense of reality itself had been systematically dismantled by people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. Emma, now a curious 2-year-old, played quietly in a portable playpen at the side of the stage, occasionally contributing babbling commentary that made the audience smile. Today, I want to talk to you about the difference between surviving trauma and transforming it into power. Sarah's transformation over the past 2 years had been remarkable. Her book, The Diary of a Survivor, had spent 18 months on the bestseller list and had been translated into 12 languages. Her follow-up book, Recognizing Financial Abuse, a practical guide when was being used by law enforcement agencies and domestic violence organizations across the country. But the real measure of Sarah's success wasn't literary or financial. It was the thousands of women who had contacted her to share their own stories of recognition and escape from manipulative relationships. The Wellington Foundation, Sarah continued, has helped over 200 families recognize and escape financial abuse in the past 18 months, but our work is just beginning. The Wellington Foundation, Sarah's nonprofit organization, provided resources for women experiencing financial abuse, including legal support, safe houses, and educational programs. The foundation was funded partly by Sarah's book royalties and speaking fees, but mostly by donations from women who had escaped similar situations. After her speech, Sarah was approached by Dr. Michael Torres, a fertility specialist who had asked to speak with her privately. "Mrs. Wellington, I need to discuss something sensitive with you," Dr. Torres said, his face grave with concern. "It's about your daughter's paternity." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What about it?" "During the investigation into your husband's financial crimes, the FBI discovered that I had been compromising my practice, using my own genetic material instead of donor sperm for fertility treatments." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that Emma is my biological daughter, not Marcus's. I've been struggling with how to tell you, because I know how much additional trauma this might cause." Sarah stared at this man who had just revealed himself to be Emma's father, trying to process the implications. Marcus had known Emma wasn't his biological child, which explained why he'd been so vulnerable to Vanessa's blackmail and manipulation. "How many other families?" Sarah asked. "Dozens. The FBI is still investigating the full scope of my violations. I wanted you to know directly from me before you heard it from investigators or reporters." Sarah looked through the auditorium window at Emma, who was contentedly playing with her toys, completely unaware that her entire parentage had just been revealed as a lie. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," Dr. Torres said firmly. "I have no legal rights, and I'm not seeking any. I just wanted you to know the truth and to offer any medical information that might be helpful for Emma's health. Are there other men who think they're raising your biological children?" "Yes, and wives who don't know their children aren't genetically related to their husbands. It's a nightmare that I created, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." Sarah realized that Dr. Torres's revelation, while shocking, didn't actually change anything that mattered. Emma was still her daughter. Marcus had still chosen to love and protect Emma, despite knowing the truth about her paternity. The love that bound their family together wasn't dependent on genetics. "Thank you for telling me," Sarah said finally. "But Emma is my daughter, regardless of whose DNA she carries. Nothing you've told me changes that." Dr. Torres nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I hoped you'd feel that way. You're an extraordinary mother, and Emma is lucky to have you." As Dr. Torres left, Sarah reflected on how much her perspective had changed over the past 2 years. 3 years ago, learning that Emma wasn't Marcus's biological child would have felt like another devastating betrayal. Today, it felt like just another complicated truth to navigate in a life that had already survived much worse revelations. The real news came the following week, when Patricia Morrison called with an update about Vanessa's case. She's agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for information about the larger criminal network, Patricia explained. The FBI is calling it the biggest breakthrough they've had in fighting organized financial crime. What does that mean for us? It means you won't have to testify at trial, if you don't want to. Her guilty plea eliminates the need for victim testimony. Sarah was surprised by her own disappointment. Part of her had been looking forward to confronting Vanessa in court, to publicly exposing the woman who had tried to destroy her family. Actually, Sarah said, I'd like to give a victim impact statement at her sentencing. I want her to understand exactly what she put us through, and I want other victims to see that it's possible to survive and thrive after this kind of trauma. That can be arranged. Vanessa's sentencing hearing took place on a cold February morning in federal court. Sarah had spent weeks preparing her statement, wanting to strike the right balance between holding Vanessa accountable and demonstrating her own recovery. Your Honor, Sarah said, standing at the podium with Emma in her arms, Vanessa Cross didn't just steal money from my family. She stole our sense of reality, our ability to trust our own perceptions, our faith in the people we love most. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table, refusing to look at Sarah or Emma, her face a mask of defiant indifference. But what Vanessa didn't count on, Sarah continued, was that trauma can become strength and survival can become purpose. The worst thing she did to me became the foundation for the best work I've ever done. Sarah went on to describe the Wellington Foundation's accomplishments, the families they'd helped, the criminal networks they'd exposed through their educational programs. I'm not asking for revenge, Sarah concluded. I'm asking for justice, and I'm asking that Vanessa's sentence reflect not just the crimes she committed, but the opportunity she's given us to prevent other families from suffering the same trauma. Judge Richardson sentenced Vanessa to 25 years in federal prison, the maximum allowable under the plea agreement. As the bailiff led Vanessa away, she finally looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost admirable in its intensity. But Sarah felt only pity for the woman who had tried to destroy her family. Vanessa would spend the next quarter-century in prison, while Sarah would spend that same time building something meaningful from the ashes of their shared destruction. After the sentencing, Sarah and Emma went to visit Marcus at the minimum security facility where he was serving his 3-year sentence. The visits had become a monthly routine, a way for Emma to maintain a relationship with the man who had chosen to be her father, regardless of genetics. How are you feeling about the sentencing? Marcus asked, looking healthier than he had in years. Prison had forced him to confront his addictions and his enablement of Vanessa's crimes. Relieved, Sarah admitted. It's finally over. And the paternity revelation doesn't change anything that matters. You're still Emma's father, if you want to be. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. More than anything. As they played with Emma in the prison visiting room, Sarah reflected on how much their relationship had evolved. They would never be married again, but they had found a way to be family that was based on choice rather than obligation, honesty rather than deception. I'm proud of what you've built, Marcus told her as the visit ended. The foundation, the books, the speaking career. You've become everything I always knew you could be. I became what I needed to become to survive, Sarah corrected. But thank you. Driving home from the prison, Sarah thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she'd been a woman whose entire identity was defined by her marriage to a man who was lying about everything that mattered. Today, she was a successful author, advocate, and entrepreneur who had built a life entirely on her own terms. She had meaningful work that helped other women, financial independence that no one could take away, and a daughter who would grow up knowing that women could be strong and successful without depending on anyone else's approval. The pregnant wife betrayed by her husband's mistress had become a woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's narrative. And that transformation was the greatest victory of all. 4 years after Emma's birth, Sarah's carefully rebuilt life took another unexpected turn. She was in her home office, working on her 3rd book, when she received a phone call that would change everything she thought she knew about her past. Miss Wellington, this is Special Agent Jennifer Parks with the FBI. I'm calling about James Morrison. Sarah's blood turned to ice. James Morrison was the source she had supposedly fabricated 15 years ago, the non-existent whistleblower who had ended her journalism career and driven her into the marriage that had nearly destroyed her life. "What about James Morrison?" Sarah asked carefully. "He's real, Ms. Wellington, and he's been looking for you for 15 years. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had built her entire sense of guilt and professional failure around the belief that she had fabricated a source to advance her career. Learning that James Morrison actually existed reframed everything she thought she knew about her past. "I don't understand. My editor said there was no record of anyone named James Morrison, because by the time your story was published, James Morrison officially didn't exist. He had been placed in witness protection after his testimony helped bring down a major corruption ring in the Seattle city government." Sarah's mind raced back to that story 15 years ago. She had been investigating municipal corruption, following a trail of leaked documents that exposed bribery, embezzlement, and bid-rigging schemes involving city contracts. "The documents you published contained information that could only have come from James's testimony," Agent Parks continued. "When your story broke, it marked him for death. We had to accelerate his relocation and give him a new identity. So I did destroy an innocent man's life. Actually, you saved it. The corruption ring assumed James was dead and stopped looking for him. Your supposed fabrication was the perfect cover story." Agent Parks arranged to meet Sarah that afternoon at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. When Sarah arrived, she found a man in his early 50s sitting alone at a corner table. He had kind eyes and graying hair, and he was studying a photograph that Sarah recognized as her author photo from her recent book. "Miss Wellington," he said, standing as she approached. "I'm James Morrison. I've been waiting 15 years to thank you for saving my life." Sarah stared at this man whose existence she had denied for over a decade, whose non-existence had shaped every major decision she'd made since her journalism career ended. "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, sitting across from him. "I had no idea you were real. I thought I had made you up to protect my actual source." "You did protect your actual source," James said with a slight smile. "Me. The story you published was based on documents I leaked, information I provided during my cooperation with federal investigators. When your editor couldn't find any record of James Morrison, it was because I was already in witness protection." "But why are you telling me this now?" James's expression grew serious. "Because my daughter has been missing for 12 years, and I think your case might be connected to hers." He pulled out a photograph of a young woman who looked remarkably similar to Emma. "This is Emma Morrison. She disappeared when she was 12 years old, taken from our safe house by people who were supposedly moving us to a new location." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. "Your daughter's name is Emma, named after my grandmother. When I heard about your case, about a baby named Emma, born during a kidnapping orchestrated by a criminal network that specializes in trafficking children from wealthy families, I wondered if there might be a connection." Sarah's hands began to shake as she processed the implications. "Are you suggesting that my Emma might not be my biological daughter?" "I'm suggesting that the people who targeted your family have a history of stealing children and replacing them with others. It's one of their most profitable operations." The possibility that Emma might not be her biological child was devastating enough, but the suggestion that somewhere another family was missing their daughter was unbearable. "What do you want me to do?" Sarah asked. "I want to arrange DNA testing. If Emma is my biological daughter, then somewhere out there, your real daughter is being held by the same people who destroyed my family." Sarah thought about Emma, now 4 years old and happily playing at preschool, completely unaware that her entire identity might be a lie. She thought about the love she felt for the little girl she'd raised from birth, regardless of genetics. "And if the test proves that Emma is your daughter, then we work together to find all the missing children, including your real daughter. This network has been operating for over a decade, stealing children from families and selling them to the highest bidders." Sarah realized that James was offering her the chance to be part of something much larger than her own story. The skills she'd developed investigating Vanessa's operation, the platform she'd built through her books and foundation, could be used to help dozens of other families. "There's something else," James said. "The FBI task force investigating these child trafficking networks wants to offer you a consulting position. Your experience with Vanessa's organization, combined with your investigative skills, makes you uniquely qualified to help identify and infiltrate similar operations. You're asking me to put Emma in danger. I'm asking you to help us make sure no other children suffer what our daughters have suffered, but the choice is entirely yours." That evening, Sarah sat in Emma's bedroom, watching her daughter sleep and trying to imagine a world where the little girl she'd raised wasn't actually hers. The love she felt hadn't changed, regardless of genetics, but the implications were staggering. If Emma was James Morrison's biological daughter, then Sarah's real daughter had been missing for 4 years. Somewhere, a little girl who should have been safe in her mother's arms was being held by monsters who trafficked children for profit. Sarah made a decision that would either destroy the life she'd built or transform it into something even more meaningful. The next morning, she called Agent Parks and agreed to the DNA testing and the consulting position with the FBI task force. "There's one condition," Sarah said. "Whatever we discover about Emma's parentage, she stays with me unless and until we find my biological daughter and can reunite both children with their correct families." "Understood. Are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation might take years?" Sarah looked at Emma, who was eating breakfast and chattering about her plans for the day, completely innocent of the storm that was about to reshape their lives. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes to make sure all the stolen children go home." 3 days later, the DNA results confirmed what Sarah had both dreaded and expected. Emma Morrison was indeed James Morrison's biological daughter, which meant that somewhere, Sarah's real daughter was still missing. The woman who had survived kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder was about to embark on the most important mission of her life, finding the children who had been stolen from their families and bringing them home. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle whatever truths that mission might reveal. 5 years after Emma's birth, Sarah Wellington stood in the courtroom as Judge Patricia Chen read the verdict that would end the largest child trafficking prosecution in Washington state history. The defendants included not just Vanessa's immediate associates, but the leadership of an international network that had been stealing and selling children for over 2 decades. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find all defendants guilty. On the charge of human trafficking, we find all defendants guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find all defendants guilty. Each guilty verdict felt like justice not just for Sarah and Emma, but for the hundreds of families who had been destroyed by this criminal organization. The investigation that had led to this moment had taken 3 years and had required Sarah to make the most difficult decisions of her life. The operation had been complex and dangerous. Working with the FBI task force, Sarah had helped design a strategy to systematically identify and rescue trafficked children while dismantling the entire network from within. The breakthrough had come when Sarah volunteered to go undercover, posing as a wealthy woman desperate to acquire a specific type of child. Using her real story of losing a daughter during birth complications, Sarah had gained access to the highest levels of the trafficking organization. "The most difficult part," Sarah later wrote in her 4th book, "wasn't pretending to be someone else. It was pretending that I didn't care about the children I was seeing while actually working every day to document their locations and plan their rescue." The undercover operation had lasted 18 months. Sarah, working with federal agents, had posed as clients interested in acquiring children who matched specific characteristics. What they discovered was a network that didn't just steal random children, but actually bred and conditioned children to replace those who had died or been taken from wealthy families. "We estimate that over 600 children were trafficked through this network in the past 15 years, Agent Parks testified during the trial. "Thanks to Mrs. Wellington's undercover work and the intelligence provided by James Morrison, we were able to rescue 412 of them. The rescued children included James Morrison's daughter Emma, who had been held in a facility disguised as a private boarding school in rural Oregon. At 16, she had no memory of her father or her original life, but DNA testing and psychological evaluation confirmed her identity. But the most emotional moment of the entire investigation came when Sarah was finally reunited with her biological daughter. Meeting my real daughter for the first time was indescribable, Sarah told the documentary crew that was following her story. She was 4 years old, calling another woman mommy, and had no idea that her entire life was built on a lie. Sarah's biological daughter, who had been living with a family in California who believed they had legally adopted her, was named Sophie. The adoptive family had been told that Sophie's biological mother had died in childbirth and that the father had voluntarily surrendered his rights. The reunion was complicated by the fact that both Emma and Sophie had bonded with their respective families. Emma considered Sarah her mother and had no memory of James, while Sophie loved her adoptive family and was terrified of being taken away from them. The hardest lesson I learned, Sarah reflected, was that love isn't always about biology and family isn't always about genetics. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is accept that children belong with the people who have raised them, regardless of DNA. After months of family counseling and legal negotiations, Sarah and James made a decision that shocked everyone involved in the case. Rather than fighting for custody of their biological children, they chose to maintain the families that had been formed through love rather than genetics. Emma remained with Sarah, who formally adopted her after James voluntarily surrendered his parental rights. Sophie remained with her adoptive family in California, with Sarah maintaining contact as a sort of honorary aunt. "We created a new definition of family," James explained during his testimony. "Emma is Sarah's daughter because Sarah raised her with love and sacrifice. Sophie is her adoptive parents' daughter because they've loved and protected her for 4 years. Biology matters, but love matters more." The unconventional arrangement worked because all the adults involved prioritized the children's well-being over their own desires. Emma and Sophie met regularly, developing a relationship as sisters who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control. Marcus, who had been released early for his cooperation with the trafficking investigation, played an important role in the expanded family structure. He had genuinely reformed during his time in prison, completing addiction treatment and therapy that helped him understand how his enablement of Vanessa's crimes had nearly destroyed innocent people. "Marcus will always be Emma's father," Sarah explained during a television interview. "Not because of genetics, but because he chose to love her when he could have walked away. That kind of love deserves to be honored." The relationship between Sarah and Marcus remained complicated but functional. They would never remarry, but they had found a way to co-parent Emma that was based on honesty and mutual respect rather than romantic love. Sarah's personal life had also evolved in unexpected ways. Her relationship with David Chen, Agent Park's brother and a trauma counselor who specialized in helping trafficking survivors, had deepened through their shared work on the task force. "I fell in love with Sarah's courage before I fell in love with her heart," David told the same documentary crew. "She showed me that the most attractive thing about a person is their willingness to risk everything for what's right." David had been instrumental in helping both Emma and Sophie adjust to the revelations about their true parentage. His expertise in childhood trauma had guided the family therapy sessions that helped all of them navigate the complex emotions involved. "We're not trying to erase the pain of the past," David explained during one of their sessions. "We're trying to build something beautiful from the truth, even when the truth is complicated." Sarah and David's wedding took place 2 years after the trafficking trial ended, in a ceremony that celebrated not just their love, but the extended family they had created from the ashes of tragedy. Emma served as the flower girl, walking down the aisle with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved by multiple adults who would protect her no matter what. Sophie participated via video call from California, adding her voice to the celebration of their unconventional but loving family. "Today isn't just about David and Sarah getting married," James said during his speech at the reception. "It's about proving that families can be created by choice, that love can triumph over genetics, and that the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for the best things we build." The Wellington Foundation had grown into an international organization that helped law enforcement agencies identify and rescue trafficked children. Sarah's books had been translated into 23 languages and were being used by social workers and law enforcement officers around the world. But the most meaningful measure of Sarah's success wasn't literary or professional. It was the quiet moments in her new home. Watching Emma and David build model airplanes together while Sophie chatted with them via video call, creating memories that were real and honest and built on truth. 5 years ago, I thought my story was about betrayal and survival, Sarah wrote in the conclusion of her final book. I thought I was the victim of a terrible crime who had managed to escape with my life and my daughter. Now I understand that my story is about transformation and purpose. The worst thing that ever happened to me became the catalyst for the most important work I've ever done. The child I thought I was fighting to protect led me to hundreds of other children who needed protection. But most importantly, I learned that family isn't about biology or legal documents or social expectations. Family is about people who choose to love each other through everything, who protect each other's safety and dignity, who create space for each other to become the best version of themselves. As Sarah finished writing those words, Emma burst through the door of her home office, chattering excitedly about her day at school. At 7 years old, Emma was brilliant, confident, and completely secure in the knowledge that she was loved by a whole community of adults who would move heaven and earth to protect her. Mommy, can we call Sophie tonight? I want to tell her about the science project we're doing. Of course, sweetheart. I'm sure she'd love to hear about it. Sarah looked at the little girl who had entered her life during the most terrifying night of her existence. The child who wasn't her biological daughter, but was absolutely her real daughter in every way that mattered. The journey from pregnant wife betrayed by her husband's mistress to successful author, advocate, and mother had been longer and more complicated than any story Sarah could have imagined for herself. But as she watched Emma dance around the office, planning her conversation with her sister in California, while David called from the kitchen that dinner was ready, Sarah realized that sometimes the best endings aren't the ones you plan for. Sometimes the best endings are the ones you create from love, choice, and the determination to transform trauma into purpose. The woman who had once defined herself entirely through her marriage to a man who was lying about everything important was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that the only story that really mattered was the one she chose to write for herself. And that story, Sarah realized as she closed her laptop and headed toward her family, was just beginning. 10 years after the night that changed everything, Sarah Wellington Chen stood in the auditorium of the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, addressing the newest class of federal agents specializing in crimes against children. 10 years ago, I was a woman who thought her biggest problem was discovering her husband's affair, Sarah began, her voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. I had no idea that I was actually living in the middle of an international criminal conspiracy, or that my survival would depend on skills I didn't even know I possessed. The audience of young agents listened intently as Sarah described the investigation that had led to her transformation from victim to advocate to consultant. Her work with the FBI task force had resulted in the rescue of over 800 children and the conviction of dozens of traffickers across 3 countries. The most important lesson I want to share with you today, Sarah continued, is that victims often have information and insights that law enforcement can't access through traditional methods. Never underestimate the power of a mother fighting for her child, or a woman who refuses to accept other people's definitions of what she's capable of achieving. After her speech, Sarah was approached by Agent Maria Santos, one of the newer task force members who had been following Sarah's work for years. Mrs. Chen, I wanted to thank you personally, Agent Santos said. Your techniques for identifying trafficking networks helped us rescue my nephew last year. He'd been missing for 3 years. These conversations reminded Sarah why she had chosen to dedicate her life to this work. Every child rescued, every family reunited, every criminal prosecuted justified the years of dangerous undercover operations and emotional trauma. But the real validation came from watching Emma, now 12 years old, grow into a confident young woman who understood both her complicated history and her unlimited potential. Mom, "Are you ready to go?" Emma asked, appearing at Sarah's side with the poise of someone who had grown up around federal agents and international investigations. "Dad said we can't be late for Sophie's graduation." Sarah smiled at the casual way Emma referred to both David and Marcus as Dad, a linguistic solution they developed to honor both men's roles in her life. Emma spent summers with Marcus and his new wife, Dr. Jennifer Kim, a pediatric psychiatrist who specialized in helping adopted children process complex family histories. "I'm ready," Sarah said, gathering her materials from the podium. They drove from Quantico to Baltimore, where Sophie was graduating from high school as valedictorian of her class. At 18, Sophie had been accepted to Stanford University with plans to study international law, inspired by her unique family's experience with the justice system. The graduation ceremony was attended by Sarah's entire extended family: David and his parents, Marcus and Jennifer, James Morrison and his partner Dr. Elizabeth Torres, Sophie's adoptive parents Frank and Linda Martinez, and even some of the FBI agents who had become like family over the years. "Looking at all of you," Sophie said during her valedictorian speech, "I'm reminded that families come in all different forms. Sometimes the people who love you most aren't the ones who share your DNA. Sometimes the people who save your life are the ones who choose to fight for you when no one else will." Sophie went on to describe how her unique family structure had taught her about resilience, justice, and the power of choosing love over biology. "My sister Emma and I were born on the same night to different mothers, separated by criminals who thought children were commodities to be bought and sold. But we were reunited by people who believe that every child deserves to know they are loved and protected." As Sophie concluded her speech to thunderous applause, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. The two little girls who had been born into chaos and separated by evil had grown into young women who understood their power to change the world. After the ceremony, the extended family gathered at the Martinez home for a celebration that would have been impossible to imagine 10 years earlier. Emma and Sophie presented a joint gift to Sarah, a scrapbook documenting the work of the Wellington Foundation and its impact on families around the world. "We wanted you to see what you've built," Emma explained as Sarah flipped through pages of photographs showing rescued children, reunited families, and convicted traffickers. "All of this started because you refused to let bad people win. You taught us that the worst things that happen to us don't have to define us," Sophie added. "They can become the foundation for the best things we do with our lives." As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself on the Martinez family's back deck with David, watching Emma and Sophie plan their summer together while the adults cleaned up inside. "Any regrets?" David asked, echoing a conversation they'd had many times over the years. Sarah looked at the two young women who called her mom, at the extended family that had been created from tragedy and choice, at the life that had been built from the ashes of betrayal and trauma. "None," she said. "Not a single one. Even about the years of danger, the undercover work that nearly got you killed. Especially not about that. Those years saved hundreds of children and brought down networks that were destroying families. Emma and Sophie are alive and safe and loved because we were willing to risk everything to fight back." David nodded, understanding the complexity of Sarah's relationship with her own survival. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what was right despite being terrified. "What's next?" he asked. "The task force wants you to head up the new international initiative." Sarah considered the offer. Leading a multinational effort to combat child trafficking would mean more travel, more danger, and more time away from the family she'd fought so hard to protect and build. But it would also mean the opportunity to replicate their success on a global scale, to help create a world where children like Emma and Sophie would never be stolen from their families in the first place. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "that Emma and Sophie are old enough now to understand that some fights are worth the risk involved. And if they're not supportive, then we'll have a family meeting and figure out how to do this work while keeping everyone safe. We've made it this far by making decisions together." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma and Sophie appeared on the deck, their faces bright with excitement. "Mom," Emma said, "Sophie and I have been talking, and we want to help with the foundation's work. We're old enough now to understand what you've been fighting for all these years. Sophie's going to study international law. Emma continued, and I want to study psychology so I can help kids who've been through trauma. We want to keep doing this work as a family. Sarah looked at these two remarkable young women who had been born into darkness but had chosen to dedicate their lives to creating light for others. Are you sure this work can be dangerous? And it's definitely going to be difficult. We're sure, Sophie said with the confidence of someone who had grown up understanding that hard things were often the most important things. You taught us that we don't get to choose what happens to us, but we do get to choose what we do about it. Besides, Emma added with a grin, somebody has to carry on the family business of fighting bad guys and saving kids. As Sarah hugged both her daughters, she realized that the story that had begun with betrayal and kidnapping had become something much larger and more meaningful than she'd ever imagined possible. The pregnant wife who had been betrayed by her husband's mistress was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that the most powerful force in the world was a mother's love combined with the determination to protect not just her own children, but all children. The diary that had started as a desperate attempt to document evidence had become the foundation for an international movement that had saved hundreds of families and would continue saving them for generations to come. And the two little girls who had been born on the same night into the worst kind of danger had grown into young women who understood that their unique story gave them the power to ensure that no other children would suffer the same fate. Some stories do have happy endings, Sarah realized as she watched the sunset with her family around her. Not perfect endings, not simple endings, but endings where love triumphs over evil and where the people who deserve to win actually do. It had taken 10 years, but Sarah Wellington had finally written the ending to her story that she wanted to read. The end.